The Nintendo Switch launched in 2017, and it was a huge hit for Nintendo, especially coming off of the failure that was the Wii U. The Switch had a great start too, with games like Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild coming out in its launch year, and then Smash Ultimate and Kirby Star Allies in 2018. A lot of these games are considered to be some of the best in their franchise, leading fans to have high expectations for other game franchises coming to the Nintendo Switch as well. Then in 2019, the Switch continued to have heavy hitters like Fire Emblem Three Houses and Super Mario Maker 2, but towards the end of the year we would get a new installment of a beloved franchise on the Nintendo Switch that many fans were excited about. The game that I'm talking about, which also happens to be in the title of this video, is Garfield Kart Furious Racing. You see, the Garfield franchise has been releasing games every other year or so since 1985, but took a 6-year hiatus in 2013 after the release of Garfield Kart for the PC, which was then later ported to the 3DS, but it was the same game. Fans clamored for a new entry into the Garfield series, especially after they saw what the Switch could do. Just imagine a Garfield game in the same style as Breath of the Wild. That's the dream. So in late 2019, they released Garfield Kart Furious Racing for the Switch, and fans loved it. This was the pinnacle of not only Garfield gameplay, but kart racing gameplay in general. I have over 1,000 hours in this game, and even as a kid growing up, I loved Garfield, which probably explains why I love Catgirl so.
See, what the f are you talking about? Garfield?
Yeah, this video is supposed to be about Garfield, isn't it? I have it written in my notes right here, it's highlighted.
That's not Garfield. That's Sword and Shield.
Oh, that says Pokemon Sword and Shield, not Garfield. Well, can't blame me, since the words Garfield and Sword and Shield just look so similar. So yeah, not Garfield, Pokemon Sword and Shield. They released in late 2019 for the Nintendo Switch as well, and although they weren't technically the first main series Pokemon games on the Switch, since the Let's Go games exist and are technically main series, I guess, Sword and Shield were still the first new experience Pokemon games on the Switch, if that makes sense. Now, whenever I mention anything about Sword and Shield in a video that's positive, or even in videos where I don't mention Sword and Shield at all, there's always a handful of people in the comments who go off about this game acting like I'm some sort of Game Freak worshiper for not completely trashing these games every opportunity that I get, and that Sword and Shield are the worst things to happen to them in the history of the universe. So let's try and keep things a little bit civil. I understand people don't like these games. I understand people really like these games. I understand people are disappointed with these games. I understand people aren't or disappointed with these games. I'm not trying to convince people to like or dislike these games. I just wanted to make a video about a Pokemon game on my Pokemon YouTube channel, although to be honest, now that I think about it, I would definitely prefer to make that video about Garfield Kart. So Pokemon Sword and Shield started out much like how any other Pokemon game from the first 6 generations would start, and follow a pretty similar formula of collecting 8 gym badges, becoming the champion, and having some sort of pesky group that tries to do some weird evil thing that requires your attention from time to time, usually towards the middle to later half of the game. While the style we saw in Generation 8 was different than the style we saw in the Alola-based games where they changed the gym formula in favor of island trials, I always personally preferred the gym style more. I appreciate that Pokemon Sword and Shield have more of a focus on you becoming the champion, rather than the game revolving around some sort of evil organization like we saw in Sun and Moon, which just took up way too much of the gameplay in my opinion. But I went into this expecting just a little bit more on my journey to becoming the champion of the Galar region. There were many rumors circulating around before the release of Sword and Shield that there would be more than 8 gym leaders or some sort of minor league gym circuit which would act like more gym leaders, but neither of those ended up happening. The gym battles are treated more like a sporting event this time around, which is cool in theory and has some cool battle music and a crowd cheering you on, but all of the gyms look so similar to one another, and the puzzles aren't as memorable as puzzles we'd see from earlier generation gyms. There were some version exclusive gyms though to make each version slightly more different than one another, which is a cool idea in theory. When it comes to puzzles in general though, outside of just gym puzzles, there really aren't many in the base games of Pokemon Sword and Shield, unfortunately. While I personally don't really like caves in Pokemon games and find them really annoying, I do still think it was a very strange omission not having any caves in the Galar region and not even having a Victory Road area. I feel like this makes the Galar region share a similar problem with Alola, although Alola did have a Victory Road, where many of the routes and areas in the Galar region just feel very linear and straightforward, albeit I don't think it's as linear as we saw in the previous generation. As for the story, to be honest, I still don't really understand what the story was after beating the game and reading a little bit more about it. The game doesn't do a great job explaining exactly what's going on, but from what I understand, the story goes that Rose, the chairman of the Elite Four, one of the first characters you meet, is actually evil. 3,000 years prior to this, an event called the Darkest Day happened in the Galar region, where Eternatus, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, the third legendary of this region, tried to absorb all of the region's energy, causing mysterious red lights to appear, which caused Pokemon to transform into their Gigantamax or Dynamax form, which we'll talk more about later. Rose wants to repeat this event again in the current day with the help of the two cover legendary Pokemon, Zacian and Zamazenta, but of course you and your rival Hop end up stopping this from happening. The story gets a little bit more in depth, but you got the basic gist of it. This all sounds rather cliche even for a kid's game, and while the concept of the story isn't terrible, the execution was rather poor and arguably the worst execution of a story we saw in any Pokemon game. We don't even learn about the Macrocosmos, Rose's company, which act as the real evil team in this game, until pretty late on in the game, and even at that, we don't really learn that much. Team Yell, which seem to be like the evil team of this generation, don't even really do anything either. They just follow around Marnie, another rival of yours, and cheer her on in her gym battles and act like her fan club. Speaking of Marnie, that's another thing that I think Sword and Shield did pretty well. They do a good job of having characters that people love, well, for the most part, which is something that Game Freak also did with Sun and Moon. Marnie is loved much like how Lily is loved, Hop and Hau are basically the same character, and Bede has a very similar story to Gladian, which is also one of the more fan favorite characters. One character that I think Sword and Shield completely dropped the ball on though was Oleana, who has a pretty interesting backstory that is never explained properly in the main game. It turns out that Oleana found her signature Garbodor as a young girl when she was homeless, and Rose took her in, which is why she follows him so closely. I really wish they could have done a better job explaining that, and just give Oleana and the Macrocosmos company more attention in general, instead of giving so much attention to Marnie and the champion Leon, but unfortunately that just wasn't the case. As for these games' gimmicks, so to say, we have Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing as the two big ones. They're basically the same thing where your Pokemon just get really big for 3 turns and has all their moves powered up, making this mechanic feel like a weird cross between Mega Evolution and Z-moves, albeit a watered down version of both, as both Megas and Z-moves were unfortunately not present in Sword and Shield. These gimmicks tie in with the Darkest Day and Eternatus of course, but the only real difference between the two is that Gigantamax Pokemon, like Kingler for example, change more in appearance when compared to Pokemon without a Gigantamax form like Hitmonchan, which just get really big. All around, they just don't feel as exciting or natural as Mega Evolution to me personally, although some people might disagree out there, and I don't like how any Pokemon can just get really big and strong out of nowhere in a lot of the more important fights. At least with Megas, only a select few Pokemon could Mega Evolve, so it was more expected. Overall, I wish they did something a little bit different to make this mechanic a little better, but I do still love some Gigantamax forms like Kingler and Sandaconda being my 2 favorites. As for post-game, something that every Pokemon game is expected to have, there really isn't too much to talk about there. There's these 2 guys who try to take back Zacian and Zamazenta and reclaim the throne of Galar, and you have to stop them, and there really isn't anything too special there. I always found it strange how there aren't many legendary Pokemon to catch in these games either besides the 3 new ones which play a role in the story. If you look at Pokemon Sun and Moon for example, you have 4 Tapus and the Ultra Beast which you could catch in the post game, while Sword and Shield share the same issue as Pokemon X and Y with having barely any legendary Pokemon to catch in the post game, and both barely even having any post game at all. To be honest, if I were to compare Pokemon Sword and Shield to any other Pokemon game, I think X and Y would be the most similar to it, as the 2 stories are even pretty similar, where they both try to recreate a disastrous event that happened thousands of years ago, and both of them just feel a little bit incomplete. Stemming from Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing though, we have Raid Dens as well. Raid Dens are sort of like group boss battles you can have against these Dynamax or Gigantamax Pokemon, with the chance to catch them at the end and get some useful items like XP candies or TMs. I think this is a great feature to be honest, something that I sink a lot of time into personally, but abusing them while playing through the main story of the game can make the game very easy for you as you just get a ton of XP candies early on which you can use to overlevel your Pokemon. While this can of course easily be avoided by just not using the candies, I've seen some people complain about that, so I think it's worth mentioning. Sword and Shield overall are pretty easy Pokemon games though, as Pokemon games have always been pretty easy, but many of the newer Pokemon games since X and Y feel a little bit too easy. I guess talking about the new Pokemon added in general is pretty important as well, although this is entirely subjective. Granted, most of this is entirely subjective. But overall, I like a lot of the new Pokemon added in these games, and I think this new cast of Pokemon is better than the new cast of Pokemon we got in Generation 7 and maybe even Generation 6. I think Galarian forms in general are a great expansion upon the Alolan forms from the previous generation, while Pokemon like Sandaconda, Rillaboom, Obstagoon, and Phalanx are some of my favorites to come out of this new game. Then we have the elephant in the room, or two elephants really, being the omission of many older Pokemon at launch and these games' graphics. I personally would have preferred it if every single Pokemon was included at launch, and I believe most people would agree with that, but that unfortunately just wasn't the case. To be honest, it really doesn't take anything away from the standard gameplay when you're trying to become the champion, since you can't catch every single Pokemon while trying to be the champion in other games as well anyway, but what it really does take away from is the things people like to do after they already fully beat the game, like battling and shiny hunting. Luckily they did add back some of the older Pokemon with free updates along the way, but overall I think they handled the whole Dexit situation rather poorly, especially leading up to the game's release, where the announcement of this was rather brushed to the side in a Nintendo Treehouse event that not that many people even watched. While I do think the Dexit movement as a whole has been a little bit over-exaggerated, especially by the radical supporters on Twitter, there's still some very valid criticism behind it, and I completely understand why people are frustrated with this. Swalot, one of my favorite Pokemon even, still isn't even in the game, and I'm still kind of upset about that. And then we have the graphics, my favorite thing about Sword and Shield. I will never not find the Sword and Shield graphic memes not funny for some reason, especially the classic tree ones, but the main problem I have with the graphics is how inconsistent they are, and I feel like people don't really mention that. There are some areas and parts of the game that actually look pretty good. Not amazing, but definitely good enough in my opinion, but for every place like that, there's another place that just looks off or straight up bad. I won't dwell on this too much since I'm sure that all of you guys have heard all about the graphics in Sword and Shield already, and people have nitpicked this into oblivion, but the place that I think exemplifies how inconsistent the graphics are the most is the bridge east of Turffield on Route 5. I pass by this area a lot while breeding Pokemon and I have no idea what I'm looking at. The bridge and the nearby buildings look pretty good, but then there's this scenery across the bridge. Everything just looks off, the lighting looks messed up, and after passing by it hundreds of times while hatching eggs, it starts to annoy me. I was gonna make the joke that even Garfield Kart Furious Racing has better overall graphics than Pokemon Sword and Shield, but I don't even think that's a joke anymore. I think Garfield Kart actually has better graphics in this game. I really don't think poor graphics alone make a game terrible, but I find it annoying when they're this inconsistent. The area that this bridge is overlooking is the wild area, which is another neat addition that we saw in Sword and Shield. I do think it is a bit awkward how wild areas are the only areas in the game with a fully controllable camera, but overall I really like the new method of encountering Pokemon which we first saw in the Let's Go games. Now you can see Pokemon running around in the wild instead of randomly encountering them in the grass every 3 steps like in older games, but unlike in the Let's Go games in Pokemon Sword and Shield, you actually have to battle the wild Pokemon and don't have to do that silly animation where you throw a Pokeball with your Joy-Con. The wild area was definitely a welcome addition in my opinion, but it's one of the laggier parts of the game, which is rather annoying, especially if you connect to the internet. As for Wi-Fi battling in this game, I used to be a very big Wi-Fi battler myself, typically in the Smogon formats. I used to stream Wi-Fi battles a ton, almost daily even in 6th and 7th generation, but the Switch games in general really killed a lot of my interest for Wi-Fi battling. VGC seems alright from what I hear, although the lack of a proper battle timer is very annoying. For those of you who don't know, in Pokemon Sun and Moon for example, if you want to do a 6v6 singles battle, the timer would be set for 60 minutes. This is plenty of time to complete a battle, although there were still some situations where the clock would run out, but it wasn't that common. In Sword and Shield, however, the timer is cut to only be 20 minutes. I really don't understand why they didn't give us the option to set our own timers before the match, as 20 minutes just isn't enough time for many of the 6v6 battles to finish. I know there's some weird workaround where you could do some sort of chess-like timer in these games that gives you more time to battle technically, but why does it have to be like this? I hate saying things like, oh, how hard can it be, when I'm not a game developer myself, but why can't they just have a customizable timer so you can set the battle to be as short as 1 minute if you want, or as long as 2 hours if you really want, for example. I've barely played any competitive battles on the actual cartridge because of this, And if I were to get back into playing competitive Pokemon again, I would probably lean more towards VGC, since that format just seems a lot more enjoyable in Sword and Shield, because the timer alone really kills a lot of the interest I have in single battles. Luckily, there are some new items and features to make getting into competitive Pokemon battling a little bit easier in Sword and Shield, but I feel like even though this is a step forward for competitive, they also take 2 steps back with every step forward, and you can say that about a lot of other aspects of the game as well. This was also the first main series Pokemon games to have DLC, and to be honest, I think both packs are pretty good. I wouldn't say there's something you must get if you have Sword and Shield or even if you like Sword and Shield, but I did put a good amount of time into both of the packs and I enjoyed them. I think Crown Tundra was better all around than the Isle of Armor because it allows you to catch a lot of legendary Pokemon, which I always like to do in older Pokemon games. I don't want to spoil the DLCs too much as they both are pretty new, but they're both basically just long side quests that take around 3 hours to complete or so, assuming you just bolt through them and don't spend too much time exploring. I personally like the idea of having DLC more so than just releasing an enhanced version of the game a year or so later that's basically the same thing all over again, but it really is just up to you if you think it's worth it, but I would definitely say I got my money's worth from the DLC. So for my final verdict on Pokemon Sword and Shield, I think they're good games. I would put them on the lower end of good if that makes sense, and somewhere in the middle of the road for all Pokemon games, but I really enjoyed playing through Pokemon Sword and Shield for the first time, more so than a lot of the last couple of games to release in the Pokemon franchise. I do think that they have their flaws, and there's some things that I wish could have been done better, possibly even delaying the game a little bit, but as the first proper new main series game on the Switch, I hope that Game Freak and Nintendo will learn from this, much like how they learned from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl on the DS, which really didn't run too smoothly on that console, and then they went on to end up finishing the DS era of Pokemon with Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, which are some of the most loved Pokemon games in the entire series. While I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me and say some silly things in the comments, at the end of the day, I bought a new video game, had fun playing it, and I think that's what matters the most when it comes to any video game. I see a lot of the blame for the bad things about these games being placed on Game Freak, but to be honest, I really think Nintendo is even more at fault than Game Freak since they're the ones that set the deadlines, which resulted in Game Freak to having to spend less time on these games than they would have liked, as there's some recent Sword and Shield leaks that really point more to the fact that they were rushed. If you're a more casual Nintendo fan who has a passing interest in Pokemon and already has a Nintendo Switch, I think you're just better off skipping these games. But if you really are a hardcore fan that has played every single Pokemon game in the past, you'll probably enjoy these games. Most of the people I come across who actually played this game as well at least think they're okay, while most people that I see saying these games are the worst thing ever made haven't even played them. If you're someone who doesn't have a Nintendo Switch though, and the only game that interests you on the console is Pokemon, then I still don't really think it's worth buying this console just for the one game. I really don't think Sword and Shield are nearly as bad as a lot of people say, but I can easily see why some people are disappointed with these games. But if you are disappointed, please don't lash out on other fans who like these games, and transversely, if you like these games, please don't lash on people who don't. I've only played through the entire game once, but I do plan on doing another playthrough eventually, possibly on stream, so follow me on Twitch if you want to see that, which will be linked in the description. All I ask is to be civil towards each other if you do come across somebody who has a different opinion from these games than you, because people can be very hostile when discussing these games for some reason. I'm sure there's a lot of things I didn't discuss in this video that people bring up in the comments, but these were the points that I thought were the most important to me. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, as one like goes a long way and helps the channel a ton, and also consider subscribing for more Pokemon videos. Thank you all so much for watching, have a great rest of your day, I'll see you all next time, and bye bye.